Hi folks, Lee Farnell here, and we're talking about leading your best life. And today I'm going to be talking with Cara Hawkins. Now, Cara came along to one of our lifter meetings just the other week and started telling me about what she did. And I said, Cara, we need to do a podcast interview. So Cara, welcome aboard to Leading Your Best Life.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks for having me.
Well, Cara, I want to talk to you about, as you talk about energy and consciousness and thinking. But before we get to that and your business and what you're doing and your mission and so on, tell us a bit about Cara Hawkins. Where have you come from and what's got you to where you are now?
Yeah, okay. So I had a pretty international upbringing. I was born in Bethlehem and lived in Jerusalem for a bit as a child. Moved to Canberra, Perth, and then spent some formative years in Cambodia, going to the international school in Phnom Penh.
Wow.
And then came back to Canberra for the rest of schooling and university before then moving back overseas and spending time in Jordan, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Greece, India before coming back to Canberra. So it's been a pretty diverse upbringing and I guess adulthood so far as well.
Wow. Wow. What a journey. I gather that your mother or father were some kind of international job, were they?
Yeah, Dad was originally with the UN in Gaza. So he worked in Gaza while we lived in Bethlehem. And then he was in international aid and now he's in diplomacy.
Wow. So if I was to say what are the motivations, what are the passions of Cara Hawkins, what would you say?
Yeah, so growing up around the world, I really feel like that was a big influence in how I just see life, which I'm very grateful for. I was quite interested in psychology, natural therapies, occupational therapy, art. As a kid, I wanted to be an illustrator and a dancer all at the same time. And I ended up studying international affairs and foreign policy, which in retrospect was an interesting shift, but at the time it was quite intentional. I loved Arabic. I really wanted to learn it and pursued that through university and in Jordan. And that sort of led me on that career path. But I keep coming back to those things that I loved as a kid, which is around, the movement, the creativity, the art, I suppose, and quite, I guess, philosophical in a sense too.
Wow. So these days, what drives you? What are your dreams? What are your passions these days?
That's a big one. So I've always been drawn to looking at ways to help people. And I think, I'm definitely not alone in that. There are a lot of people with a similar outlook. And part of the reason I moved from my foreign policy role was I loved it. It was so interesting, but I wasn't feeling like I could have the same kind of positive impact that I wanted to on other people and explored other ways of doing that. So that's what led me to then study yoga. I'd been a practitioner since I was 15 years old, decided to study teaching, and all of that has led to looking at what change looks like on a broad scale from a foreign policy geopolitical approach, what doesn't work organizationally through my role as a change manager in consulting, and then on a personal level through yoga and through coaching and what that change looks like. So what I'm really passionate and interested about is what does connection to self look like? How does that then express in the outside world? And how can we create positive change personally, organizationally, and globally in a way that supports people as well as the planet?
Wow. That's almost sounds like a United Nations speech right there and then, Let's start. But as you say, this whole point around connection to self. Let's talk about your journey, as you say, from 15 yoga. Tell us a bit about your own journey and what have you learned in terms of connection to your own self? What's been some of the ups and downs that has happened with Cara Hawkins?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it is that I came the very long way to it in that I was extremely disconnected from myself. As a child, everyone is largely connected to who they are. But I found moving around the world, I was great at being a chameleon and didn't really know what home was or who I was and could just adapt to wherever I was at the time. And it's not something I speak a lot about publicly at this point, or haven't to this point. But when I was around 11, I think, I started getting really severe anxiety. I actually had since I was 5. And that ended up sort of spiraling into quite a severe eating disorder at that time. And I spent time in hospital around that. And it was so interesting looking at how the treatment was at that time. That was 15 years ago now. But there was a significant disconnect from self. And it's been the last 15 years of me exploring ways back. And so obviously, made some pretty big strides in that time. And I just find that it's actually quite common, the way that we're raised, the way that, our work expectations are. It's very much in the head, disconnected from who we are, what our desires are, and there are a lot of external shoulds. So I initially started yoga to start to try and manage that anxiety once I'd come out of hospital, and to actually unintentionally, as a side effect of that, was helping to heal my body image and actually reconnect to my body in a very different way. And that was a start of that embodiment journey of realizing that we can't intellectualize our way out of things like, worthiness, or, try and convince ourselves of our worthiness or of our confidence or of our sense of calm just from the brain, because it's actually a felt experience and a very visceral experience. So all of that to say that I find that coming back to self and reconnecting to self is a very whole body thing. And we're very much focused in the mind in this day and age.
Yes. And I love what you said there. Trying to intellect or intellectualize our way out of whatever the problem is, as you say, anxiety or anything else. And I literally was on the phone this morning. We're going to do a men's mental health session down at Cottesloe. It came about, one of the fellows down there said, I lost my business at about age 55 or 60 or whatever it was. And he said, I felt I was put on the scrap heap. And because he's a scientist, I said, he's a geologist, of course, very good intellect, but he tried to intellectualize himself out of it. And as the work that I've been doing and studying, Sadhguru and others, they talk about the intellect is a cutting instrument. When you talk about, do you want the intellect, do you want a sharp intellect or a blunt intellect? Everyone says, I want it to be sharp. Therefore, what you want it to be? It's a cutting instrument where we dissect the problem. But the problem being, if you're going to use the intellect, the cutting instrument on yourself, you're then beginning to cut what people say, I'm cut up. Yeah, how you cut up? You're cut up because you are using your own intellect to cut yourself up, let alone if it's on an unstable or anxious or upset emotional base, where we start to think the mind is all one thing, the intellect and the emotion. No, it's a whole range of things. And I think that's where the East, yoga and the yogics and the yogic science is so valuable in going, no, the mind is it's not the brain, this organ that does everything. There's a whole range of things, let alone, as you say, the relationship between the mind and the body, and the mind, the body, and the emotions. And you've just said, calm. How do you calm yourself down? You can't calm it down often with the intellect. You're calming it down with, as you say, the breathing, the body, movement. So give me some of the insights that you've learned, or even that you now teach. I mean, let's just go back. You said you went from yoga, and of course, a lot of people think yoga is just you get on the mat and you're doing the physical exercise. So tell me your definition or interpretation of what goes on with this thing called yoga.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to start with as well as, a caveat, as when I started yoga, I hated it. So
Really?
a lot of people have a lot of resistance to yoga.
Why did you hate it?
One of them, because I couldn't slow down. My nervous system was so dysregulated that I found it so hard to slow down, but I knew it was good for me, so I kept going. So I think, first of all, you don't have to love yoga to start it. And that's, it's teaching the body to calm as well. So the way that I like to see it and to practice it is, there are 8 limbs in yoga. The actual physical practice is only one of them. I won't go through all of them, but really for me, the way I see yoga is it is a process of reconnection to self. And, some of it's through movement. A lot of it I also find is, if yoga means, a more common, I guess, interpretation or translation of yoga is union. And it's, how can you practice yoga on a day-to-day life? How you interact with your food, your drink, your environment, other people around you as well. So it's, I guess you bring it off the mat, and that's also where you apply it, because you can be really calm on the mat, but how do you take it into everyday life? And it needs to, I find, permeate everything to start having a more profound impact. But where you start is coming to the mat, doing the practice. And importantly, it's not just following a structure or following instructions. The way I like to practice and also teach it is that, the teacher is a guide, but what we really want is to be guided by the bodies and to be adjusting whatever posture it is, whatever sequence it is to your individual body, and to really tune into how it's feeling. So rather than being like, okay, this is what that pose is meant to look like, it's okay, can I adjust it so that I'm finding the length in the right places and finding the strength in the right places, and really creating almost an intimacy with your body, but then also with the mind, and how the mind will try and push you and be like, well, you're meant to do this, or you're meant to go harder. And then having that separation, that spaciousness to just exist.
Wow. So when you were studying to be a teacher, where did you do that? Where did you do the study to be a yoga teacher?
So the initial study was between Dubai, because I was living in Abu Dhabi, so I'd go up on the weekends while I was still working, and also in Indonesia. So I split between those two areas, and then later I did some more study in India on women's self-care, and also yin yoga and nidra.
Fantastic. So give me a couple of key insights you got as you were doing that, or even breakthroughs that occurred where you went in maybe thinking one thing and came out going, oh my God, I'm thinking completely differently as a result of that. What are some of the key lessons you learned that you could share with us?
From yoga specifically?
From doing your yoga instruction, because clearly, for you to become an instructor, I'm sure you're not only learning intellectually or learning knowledge, but you're having some personal breakthroughs in there as well on your own journey.
Yeah, well, one of the first ones was, I talk about it's not all about the intellect, but my whole job was intellect. One of my yoga teachers, he's like, you need to stop analyzing everything. And I was like, my job title is literally analyst. This is what I do for a living. And I was very intellectual. Still enjoy it, but have more balance. And so I was very much, my job at the time was literally in a library. For some reason, our office was in a library, doing a lot of intellectual work at the back corner, no facing audiences of any kind, to then running my own freelance gig in Dubai, where I knew one person and built a full-time client base. But in getting up in front of my first public classes, I was like, what am I doing at the front of an audience? I'm usually at the back of nowhere, and I'm not sure I enjoy this. But what really shifted that was that no one's here for me. The yoga class has nothing to do with me, or if I wobble or fall. It's completely about each individual's practice, and I'm here to guide it. And so once I shifted that, it's not about me. I'm, I guess, almost a role model of it, of, hey, if I wobble in a posture, how do I respond to that? And then how do I teach my students to respond to those things? So then it actually was another challenge to embody yoga on another level, and to be that embodiment to help share it in another level, if that makes sense.
Fantastic. So then you've got to the stage now, and I'm going to share the screen so we take a look at your website, where here we go, Cara Hawkins, ignite your potential and unleash your joy. Mind, body coaching and education to reconnect with your inner compass, boost your confidence and maximize your positive impact. So we're talking calm, confident, clear. So that's fantastic. I was very impressed with the website. Say goodbye to quick fixes and hello to lasting transformation. Did you write that copy? It's fantastic. It's very good.
I wrote the copy of my whole website. I was actually really proud of it because I have zero experience in building websites.
Yeah.
It was a learning curve and a half.
I provide you with the tools and guidance to make your next steps a breeze. So there it is. Your help purpose-driven doers and dreamers reach their potential and maximize their joy. So maybe can you give us a bit of an insight into, obviously without giving people's names away, and obviously as you say there about you and blog and there's individuals and businesses and so on, but without giving people's names away, give me some examples of people who've come to you. Let's just start with a couple of case studies. What type of people were they? What triggered them to come to you? And what was the journey you took them on? Give me an example of it. You can use a fictitious name if you like, just to help. But just give us an idea of the journey. Make it concrete.
Sure. Well, the majority of people who come to me are in a state of transition or seeking to initiate a transition of some
When you
kind.
say transition, leaving their husband or wife, changing jobs, losing weight, what?
So usually personal and career. So often it's related to career. Other times it's internal shifts around, for example, eating habits, body image, confidence and clarity in direction. So, but largely it has to do with purpose and meaning and what we're showing up for in the world. Because, as I guess with my journey, we're doing I call it the socially expected trajectory. Or the socially acceptable trajectory, and we're going along this, and then we get to a point of like, actually, is this me? What do I want? I've just been doing what I think is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people come to me at that point where they start questioning. And it's, some of my clients I've helped to move from IT consulting into environmental policy, and that was, her dream role. We have people coming in who are moving from management consulting to intimacy coaching and sex therapy, psychology to healing work, transitioning into their own businesses or going to another level in their business. Because a lot of the time what I find is that we know what to do practically, or we have people who can help us on the practical skills. But a lot of what is the challenge and what's holding us back are the internal things. And so that's where I really come in, is on the internal things. Like, we've reached a new edge of confidence. Like, how can we expand into that space?
So give an example, because again, a real life example of, let's say, it could be a plumber or a management consultant or someone, so that I can picture in my head and really live vicariously through the story of what triggered them. Was it an argument with their husband or wife, or their boss did this? What? Because I think in any business, it's good to know what the trigger points are that actually trigger the client to reach out, or at least be open to a conversation. So can you give me an example of a trigger point of someone?
That's a good question. Frankly, for most of my clients, it's been because they've been questioning and they've been searching for someone, and then we meet in some capacity, they come across my work, or they get a personal referral to me. So there's this sense of, I'm not sure where I'm going, and there's this experience of being in a liminal space, and then somehow there's a connection, and that's the identification of, oh, okay, that's what I need, that clarity. So they're usually already in a space of questioning, but not knowing where to go from there. So then when I offer, these are some options of where to go from there, that's what sort of solidifies it.
Right. And so when they come to you, what is the journey you take people on? How does it work? What's your process?
Yeah, so it's really different for different individuals, but what we really start to look at, and what I find with most people, is there's that disconnection from self, disconnection from body. So that's often where we
How does
begin.
that show up? How does that show up when you say disconnection from self? You've used that term a number of times. So how does that show up in a person when you say disconnection from self? What does that look like, or feel like, or sound like?
So low confidence, not a very strong sense of self, not particularly trusting of themselves, quite high stress, unclear direction, quite overwhelmed, anxious, unable to sort of maybe sort through emotions, or feeling overwhelmed by emotions, maybe having coping mechanisms that aren't constructive, for example, around food, around shopping, money. Potentially, I actually work with a lot of people who have ADHD as well, and sort of exploring challenges that are overwhelming at that time as well. So those are ways that often shows up. It's overwhelm, anxiety, pressure, burnout a lot of the time.
Right.
And that's what brings them.
So then when someone works with you, over how many sessions, over how many months, years, how does it work? And I suppose people light up or change at different rates, but what do you recommend when someone comes to you? What do you recommend? Come to 5 sessions or 10 sessions or once a week, or how does it work?
Yeah, it really depends on the individual and goals. I think at least 4 sessions is to start making tangible change is really important. There are people who come weekly, there are people who come fortnightly, monthly. It really does depend on the goals, but having that ongoing touch point is really important. There are occasions where you can have one-off sessions that, if there's a very specific, narrow topic, for example, I want to get a clearer vision statement for my next role. We can do that in a session, but to then carry it through, you have that consistency. So ideally starting with weekly for 4 sessions, and then we can drop down to fortnightly, or potentially monthly if there's a stable foundation already there.
Fantastic. Give me some example, like a before and after, a bit like a Jenny Craig. They came in and they lost. So give me an example of someone who might have come in, as you say, lost or disconnected from self, and then what was some of the outcomes? Can you give me an example of that so I can imagine the journey and the as someone said, the dream outcome? What happened?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess, a caveat to this is, one thing is that a lot of it is inner work. So it's not like, okay, this person came away, lost, X amount of weight or gained this amount of money. And so I'm very cautious around advertising in that way, because inner shifts are quite intangible, but it's how people feel. So one of my clients, with that caveat, one of my clients came in with quite significant disconnection to self, in the sense of being very anxious, quite depressed, not sure where to go with their career, loves writing, couldn't, get to writing, was having trouble with ADHD, wasn't able to leave the house, hadn't been moving for 2 years, and felt like they'd tried everything. They'd had 13 months of intensive therapy.
Goodness.
And I'm very, very, I like to highlight that I'm not a therapist. Don't work with mental health issues as a therapist. The only way that I do work with that is in tangent with them. So it's very important that the person is already seeing a therapist. If they're on medications, they're working with their doctor to do that. What I do is, we talk about that connection to body. We did a little bit of education as well around what is the nervous system? How does the nervous system work? We started, and how to calm it. We looked at the inner critic and started to separate that inner critic from who you are and notice where it might be holding you back. And then different techniques and ways to start to manage the inner critic in a more constructive way. We did a very holistic way to set goals as well. That is it's easier if you have ADHD, but also puts a lot less pressure on yourself. And so after, this person only did 4 sessions, and by the end of 4 sessions, she felt a lot more hopeful, a lot more confident. She'd had huge shifts in her anxiety. She was getting outside of the house at least once a week, which was massive for her. She'd started exercising again for the first time in 2 years. And from discussions with her doctor, again, we didn't discuss it at all, but she mentioned that she had been able to come off her medications, which she tried to do for a number of times, but that these tools had supported her to do that, and her doctor gave the clearance to stop those medications. That was never the goal, but for me, it was just a reflection of, the depth of the shifts that we were able to do, and more importantly, empowering her to be able to carry that forward into her life, because my idea is to essentially work myself out of a job to really empower clients to be able to do all of this for themselves. And this isn't like a 3-month shift, you're going to be amazing. This is, how do we create sustainable change and ongoing tools for maintenance that you keep for life?
Yeah, perfect. So as you say, ongoing, and you want them to become more and more independent,
yes,
as distinct from codependent on you.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And how do you, I mean, obviously I was going to about to say, how do you look after yourself? Well, obviously yoga is one of those things. But what's your self maintenance, staying in touch with yourself program look like?
Yeah, so yoga is a big one. For me, being in nature as well. So that's actually partly why I moved to Perth, to be closer to nature, also in weather that makes me more excited to get outside into nature. Movement, intentional movement of all forms. So being very intentional, moving at the gym, dancing, just moving is very, very helpful and something I always recommend to people. Guided visualizations, my personal ones that I do for myself and also ones that I listen to, extremely helpful. A lot of it is around body. So, what we're consuming, but also how. And also social connection is really, really important. I think that that's really underrated. And it's not about, chit chat with people. It's about connecting with people on a deeper level where you feel seen and you have shared interests. That is incredibly transformative. And the other thing is connecting to your joy and playfulness. This is something that I need to keep reminding myself about as well, because I was actually having this discussion with a friend recently that a lot of our internal challenges and also externally seem so complex. And so we assume that the solution has to be super complex. But she very compassionately, in a very compassionate way, described some of the tools that I suggested to her and that had been amazing for her as gentle and unsophisticated, but incredibly effective. And I think there's this idea that, we have to make it so complex and so serious. But if what we're trying to do is really take off weight of burden, of burnout, of stress, of, this heaviness or of this anxiety, why would that solution be equally rigid and grey and serious? So I like that approach of, it's very gentle, unsophisticated or playful and joyful.
Brilliant. So on a daily basis, let's just talk about your everyday habits. I'd like to find out what people's days look like. So just tell me, what time do you get up and what's your daily routine? What does it look like in terms of maintenance and work? Tell me what it looks like.
Okay, that's a really interesting question. So my days change seasonally and based on my body. So I try not to have exactly the same every day, but it's tuning into my body's own cycles, the weather's cycles. So I like to get up really early. 6 o'clock I used to start work at 6. Because of the winter and the cold, I've been getting up a little bit later. I like to do yoga first thing in the morning, even if it's not for too long. And something called morning pages, which I can talk about in a minute, but I highly recommend it. I haven't been doing it for a little while, and I've recently started picking it up again this week, and it's incredible. I'll talk about it a bit now, but it's basically, it's not my idea. It's this woman called Julia Cameron who wrote a book called The Artist's Way. And the idea is that you get up first thing in the morning, you write stream of consciousness, 3 pages, and it doesn't matter what you write. You just don't stop writing. So even if you get up and you're like, and you start writing, I'm cold, I'm tired, this is stupid, why I have to write 3 pages? 3 pages seems so long. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm only halfway through the first page and I feel like I want to skip lines. Like whatever's coming to mind, get that on paper, and it's amazing what comes out. And that is such a deep connection to self. And when you're doing it first thing in the morning, it's also your mind hasn't had a chance to catch up. There's more of this perhaps subconscious coming through because you've just woken up. So doing that first thing in my new reading chair, then yoga, and some guided visualization or self-guided through the body. Warm porridge, I eat or try to eat according to Ayurveda, the Indian science. It's the Indian medicine, I guess, ancient wisdom there. And it's really interesting. I love it. So eating very warm foods all through winter and grounding. So porridge in the mornings, and we have soups and stews for lunch and dinner. But I really like working from relatively early in the morning. I've recently in winter been going out for walks around midday or going to the gym at that time rather than in the evening, because That's when the sun is strongest and I have the most energy. Do some more work in the evening, and I try and switch off by around 5 or 6 to be able to then have a nice wind down towards bed, and either doing rolling with the foam roller or acupressure mats, the Shakti mat, and yoga nidra as a bedtime routine as well.
Fantastic. Look, it's great to hear people's routine, and this idea of morning writing. You remind me, my mother, just after my father died, I think she started going to carers like a debrief. She cried and cried and cried, but somewhere out of that came this writing every day. So now over 30 or 40 years, there's journals and journals, but literally she writes, there's her life story. But as you say, somewhere in there is that clearing process that goes on. And I imagine there's a difference between, and people talk about the difference between writing with a pen versus if you sat there on a keyboard. Is there a difference, do you think?
Oh, 100%. Yes, this needs to be pen and paper if at all possible.
What do you think the difference is there?
I know that there's a lot of science behind it. There have been studies into it, but for me, it just feels more organic because typing is all the letters are separate, and on a machine, it's got a different light. Whereas with a pen and paper, it's all connected.
There's a flow.
There's more of a flow, and that is a really powerful way to find your own voice as well, which again is a significant part of connection to self.
Yeah, brilliant. Let me ask you, what books are you reading, or what are some of the great books you've read? But maybe tell me what you're reading at the moment. What's sitting next to your bed, or where you're next to your reading chair, or wherever?
So I'm almost finished this book called The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate. I've taken so long to get through it because I'm just folding the corner of every second page. I'm finding it fantastic, and it's about, I think the subline is trauma and healing in a toxic culture.
Right.
Something along those lines. It's a fascinating book. It talks about human thriving and the systems within which we operate, and how the systems in which we operate just are not supportive of human thriving, which actually links to my work and where I'm going with it. Another book I just read, or just finished, is called Aphrodite's Breath by Susan Johnson. Yep. I absolutely loved it. It's a memoir of her and her 85-year-old mother living on a Greek island. And wow. I particularly love it because it's the same Greek island that I lived on at the same time. So I knew Susan over there, and we knew similar people. It's a tiny island, so every beach she describes, every village, and a lot of the characters in the book I'm quite familiar with, or at least have met, and it's quite special and has really inspired me again to start writing myself, because I originally moved to Greece to write a book, which is still in process. So.
Okay, great. Well, get on with it.
Indeed.
Just I've a couple of questions that I like to ask people. If you're going to be leading your best life, what are some of the strengths that Cara Hawkins has that you should be playing to, or even playing to more often? What are some of your strengths, would you say? 2 or 3 key strengths?
Me personally, or one?
Yes, you personally.
Yeah. I think resilience is a big one. I've experienced and initiated a lot of change and moving in my life, both internally and externally. And I think with that is the ability to connect to people on a deep level, which I really enjoy and find very wholesome. And I guess also relating to that is my mind can be quite creative, scattered at times, but it also connects the most random things in new and exciting ways, which also helps me be a very good coach, because I can help bring together and reflect back to my clients in a way that can start bring clarity to, what might be quite a lot of overwhelm.
Fantastic. And Ray Dalio, a hedge fund manager out of America, but very successful fellow, says we have to be willing to confront our weaknesses, as in, what areas you're weak in, and therefore, either how do you get other people in to compensate for that, or do something about it. So if I was going to ask you, what would you say are 1 or 2 of your weaknesses that you need to confront, deal with, compensate for? What would they be?
Well, I think related to that strength, there's the other side of the scatteredness, which is, that
Right.
like ADHD mind, a bit of a challenge to focus sometimes because I get excited and inspired about new things.
Mhm.
And another one of these, which I consistently have to remind myself about, and which I recently was very lovingly reminded of by someone I went to see, is to trust myself more.
Mhm.
And I've come in huge leaps and bounds in that space, but it's still something, an ongoing thing to trust myself more.
Fantastic. And so saying all of that, say in 3 to 5 years from now, Cara Hawkins and her business, if we we're going to paint a picture, what would it look like? Or even her life, Cara Hawkins and her life. If you're going to lead your best life, lead your best business, a business that supports your lifestyle, what would it look like?
Good question. I love my lifestyle at the moment. I am exactly where I want to be right now from a lifestyle perspective.
Mhm.
I think from a business perspective, it would be, greater outreach to clients who I can genuinely help. For me, I love working with people who are purpose driven and seeking to do good for people and planet. So having a greater network of people who are in that space of work and being able to genuinely support them in new ways, to connect them in new ways, and to have new ways to share. So by that time, my book will be done.
Good.
But I'll also, have new and exciting ways, not just to share, but to coach, but to connect people as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So, Cara, is there anything that I haven't asked you would have liked me to ask you before we wrap up this interview?
Yeah. So I think the final thing is, because I focus on change, there's something that many of us get stuck on around change, and that is expecting it to happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
So often we hear about, maybe on social media or whatever, massive shifts and breakthroughs. And those can happen in a short amount of time, but the buildup has often been protracted. And the important thing that I really work on as well is integration, to make sure it sustains change. So this means, there is ongoing work, there's ongoing time and attention that's required. It's not as Instagrammable or as, easy to shout out on LinkedIn, but that's where the really deep and fulfilling and sustainable long-term work happens as well. So I guess taking away a lot of judgment or even shame that comes around change and allowing it to happen in a time that may not fit your intellect's time frame.
Wow. Wow. You're reminding me of the quote from Aristotle that we use. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. And you're talking specifically there about daily habits on the inner world. And I was saying to the guy today I was talking to, which, Sadhguru talks about, he says, this incredible mechanism we have called the human mind, the human body, it doesn't come with a user manual. And even if it did, who's read it? And what you're talking about in the work you do in terms of energetic and the coaching you're doing is helping people get in touch. It seems to me, get in touch with that inner world, the user's manual. So, one, how do people get in touch with you, Cara? How do you recommend them contacting you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Cara E. Hawkins, Cara with a K, on Instagram, or carahawkins.com.au. So I'm very responsive to DMs and any messages through the website. Obviously out and about in a lot of Perth events as well, but those are the best ways to get in touch.
Fantastic. And if people are going to lead their best life, let's leave them with 2 or 3 tips that you would recommend that have worked for you, but you've also seen with your clients. Give me 2 or 3 key tips. You'd say, guys, based on my learnings and my life, here are 2 or 3 key things I really recommend you be doing. What would you say?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing is it's important to focus on habits and doing, but we want to also go beyond that and look at how we're being. So it's shifting ways of being as well as potentially ways of doing. The second one is starting to bring a lot more curiosity and compassion to the self and to start just observing what are the different, this might sound a bit odd, but voices that are going on in the mind.
Mm-hmm.
There are different narratives that we're playing. There are different parts that are within us. So bringing a lot of curiosity and compassion to those different parts and those different narratives that are going on can also help bring a lot of clarity and start unpacking what might seem like a very confusing internal world.
Wow. And needless to say, having coaching conversations and a coaching journey with you help people do that. I mean, it resonates with me straight away when you start going different stories or different narratives and different voices. And you know, whether they're your own voice or my case, Auntie Norma's voice, or your mum's voice, or your dad's voice, or your swimming coach's voice, or that critic, that inner critic that's there. All of those need to be managed. Cara, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And folks, do touch base with Cara, the whole area of inner world and energy and unleashing potential. Cara, I look forward to you and I spending more time together at our Lifter business networking meetings and seeing your business and your network grow. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Lee.
Bye-bye.
Bye.